Tonight's conversation is, in my view, extraordinarily important. It's extraordinarily important not only for those of us who live and work in Silicon Valley. It's extraordinarily important for Stanford University, for us as an educational institution. And it's also extraordinarily important for the future of the tech sector on a global basis. The conversation's topic tonight is about closing the racial and ethnic diversity gap in high tech. And I think it's very important that we all begin with a very simple point of fact, and that is there is a racial and ethnic diversity gap in high tech, and that gap is quite large. And it's been with us for quite a long period of time. And the question on the table is, having recognized the issue, having fessed up to the problem, what are we going to do to address the issue? And tonight's conversation on that topic is going to be led by Dave Calloway. Dave is the editor-in-chief of USA Today. And I forgot, my name is Joe Grunfest, by the way. I'm here on the faculty at Stanford Law School. I am senior faculty at the Rock Center for Corporate Governance. And I should also say I'm a co-founder of a Silicon Valley company, Financial Engines. Co-founded that company with Bill Sharp. He's got the Nobel Prize in economics. I don't. In case there was any confusion. The rule around the company is if the problem is more complicated than long division, see Bill. If the problem can wind up sending us to jail, see Joe. So we have a very, very simple division of responsibility. So ladies and gentlemen, with that by way of introduction of the introducer, I give you Dave Calloway, the editor-in-chief of USA Today.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you to Stanford University for hosting this great event tonight. I love a place that serves wine before the event, right? 'Cause it gets everybody's creative juices flowing. It gets everybody in the right mood for a little bit of debate. And that's what we're going to be looking to have here tonight on this incredibly important topic. I'm joined by a very distinguished panel tonight. On your far left is Richard Thompson Ford, Professor Richard Thompson Ford, George E. Osborne Professor of Law here at the Stanford Law School and author of several books, including The Race Card, which we will be talking about during the panel. Next to him on his left is Laura Gomez, the founder of tech media company Vive, and a former employee of both Google and Twitter, who can tell us some interesting stories about what it's like to be an executive rising through the ranks of those two companies and to also be in the minority. Next to her, a man who needs no introduction, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, senior founder and president of the Rainbow Push Coalition, and one of the principal, if not the principal drivers of the campaign to raise awareness about this issue of diversity here in Silicon Valley and in the tech industry. Next to the Reverend is Nancy Lee, Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Google, and one of the leaders at that smallish tech company that we've heard of in trying to crack this issue and lead the way for the rest of the industry. And next to her is Maxine Williams, Global Head of Diversity at Facebook. And I really want to say thank you both to Nancy and Maxine. I appreciate all of our panelists coming tonight, but both of you for representing the industry, an industry that still in many places is nervous about talking about these issues. So thank you both for coming. All right, we're going to get right into it. The U.S. workforce is roughly 12% black and 16% Hispanic. In the tech industry, specifically here in Silicon Valley, 2% black and 3% Hispanic. So there's obviously a lot of work to do. Of the 189 directors at 20 large tech companies measured by the Alliance for Board Diversity, 189 board members, 3 are black and 1 is Hispanic. So there's some serious work to do here. A lot of the tech companies led by Facebook and Google have been disclosing their numbers over the course of this year, and we've been reporting on them at USA Today. And I'm not going to rehash those. We know the industry numbers, but I will, just for sake of disclosure, go over the USA Today numbers, which are no great shakes either. The media industry suffers from the same type of issues, the same type of problems, and it's even more, it stands out even more because we are dedicated to bringing this issue to the forefront, and yet it's at our very door as well. The American Society of News Editors, which represents about 1,000 newspapers and news organizations, has an average of about 13% minority staffers in each newsroom. At USA Today, it's 19%, a little better, not ideal. 7% are Asian, 6.5% Black, and 3% Hispanic. So clearly, even at a company like USA Today and our parent Gannett, which pride themselves on their diversity efforts and their community outreach, it's an issue. And so we're not here to throw stones. We're here to get to the heart of the solutions. What I'm hoping to do is let you finish your wine, and we'll do about 30, 40 minutes of panel discussion, hit some of the harder questions, and then open it up so that all of you get a chance to ask questions yourself in a classroom participatory environment. So I'm going to start off with the Reverend Jackson. Reverend, we've made some progress. We made some progress, but there's a long way to go. What would you like to see come out of these discussions in terms of action items this year?
Well, to go from a kind of resistance to the data and a willingness to measure, the revelation about where the problems are, the deficiencies are, and some plan for goals, targets, and timetables to close the gaps. We're having a conference in San Francisco. The next steps, December the 10th, precisely focused on that. When we first challenged the Valley on board members, it was so obvious that we had all these blank spaces. And these are not 189 engineers, by the way. They are rather rank and file, high profile business people who recycle the wealth in their friendships. And then we asked the issue about the C-suites. The numbers are as bad in C-suites as on boards. We were asked about EEO1 reports, and that's where the companies came together and filed a lawsuit to not reveal the data. Our argument was put them at a competitive disadvantage. They won the lawsuit, as a matter of fact. But then we bought shares of stock in the corporations and went around that process and demanded to know, given the index of consumers on our company, why doesn't our company have people on our board or in our C-suite? We raised it from a different angle. And Google was the first to comply by revealing just how great the disparity was. Other companies began to fall down the line saying, well, us too. Now there's a kind of shared misery. The next step is to go beyond shared misery to a commitment. I don't believe there's anything that involves creativity the Valley cannot do. My last point is that when we are dealing with the moral fault line of white male supremacy, we just had the problem with gender equality and with racial justice. And the extent to which we're limited by white male domination, the lockout market, money, talent, and location. And that becomes our challenge tonight, is how do we get these one-eyed quarterbacks who are ever so brilliant but cannot see much of the field, and they miss market, money, talent, and location on their blind side, and become as value added, not the cost of doing business. And that's what I want to happen in the December 10th meeting for companies to come forth with their plans. We're told two things. One, that we cannot find them. Well, we can find them. We can find people educated in tech that can't get a job. We can find them. We can find schools and HBCUs that train them. We can do that. And further, if there are not enough of them, bring some of the offshore money back home and invest in training them. And the last part would be the Valley is not just high tech. There's the notion that unless you are tech superior, you can't get a job, but most companies have 50% plus of non-tech people in the Tech Valley. They're lawyers, ad agencies, marketing, services, construction, a whole range of services. So I would close by saying there's nothing that we cannot do in the Valley. And there's no good excuse for companies that are post-civil rights movement to be so racially segregated. Thank you.
Nancy, you have done a lot. Google's done a lot to be at the forefront of this move. Specific things that you are doing to try to increase the awareness inside Google and outside in the universities. One of the ones that I was most interested in when we talked last week was the Googler in Residence program, where you actually have Google staff in residence at the traditional black universities, working with the professors and working with the students to kind of develop them in ways so that then when they graduate, they will have, the types of skills that you guys look for when you're hiring. What exactly do you look for? And
well, yeah,
go ahead.
I agree in so many respects with the Reverend Jackson, because I think, whether it's whether we're arguing we can't find them, it's definitely the case that all of our stats, I think, reflect the fact that we're not doing a good enough job doing that outreach, because otherwise you wouldn't see that gap between what we think the available talent supply could produce and what is in our workforce. And from our perspective at Google, what we've been reviewing and analyzing is, well, where are we going to look for them? And what we've discovered is that we're going to too narrow a set of colleges, for example. We go to the elite of the elitist, right? Google and Facebook as well is keenly interested in having the best and the brightest and this highly elite workforce. But that means that we go to all the same places. And one of the things that we're doing is casting a wider net, because there's amazing talent, incredible innovators and creators who are not at that narrow set of schools, and in fact are at schools where there's more diverse representation. So that's something that we're doing. But you're right, that another aspect of it is, to the extent that these students are in places like historically black colleges and universities, we have to ask ourselves, well, how do we recruit from there? And what we have found is that some of the curriculum at those schools may not match to an MIT or a Carnegie Mellon. It's a reality. And so instead of not drawing talent from those schools, we need to help those colleges and universities bring more rigor and more competitiveness to the computer science programs, for example. So that's why we decided, let's just essentially drop in some of our own Googlers to help look at the curriculum, really provide some consultation to the academics there, so they can understand what types of skills we need to have people be ready to drop in and flourish at Google. Because the last thing you want to do is go and recruit them, have them come in, and then have a bad experience.
Right, that's even
worse.
worse.
Because they don't have the requisite skill.
Maxine, I read a story about you last week where you, I think you talked your way into Yale somehow. It's a fabulous story. Tell us, what experiences did you have there coming out of that elite university, and how has that helped you focus Facebook's program?
I'm 115 years old, so it's a little unfair to ask me about what I experienced a million years ago. But what I can say is that for me, I had the type of intersectionality that no one dreams about, right? Coming from a developing country as an immigrant, as a poor black woman, child of a single mother, there was no reason I should have been at Yale at all. So if anything, what I can say is that was my first indoctrination or understanding or exposure to what privilege could bring. I hadn't seen it before. I remember going there and saying, oh, so that's what fathers do, seeing people with two parents, where they had so much opportunity to succeed versus those who really had to be more creative, as Reverend Jackson says, to find ways to overcome the imbalances that have been constructed over time, right? The compounded effect of lack of equity. So what I learned from being there was that one had to be very resourceful. And that understanding of what resourcefulness can bring to close gaps is perhaps the thing that I have taken with me throughout. Now that I'm at a place like Facebook, where I see again that there are certain gaps that we're trying to fix, where I see that we have resources we can use, the issue of how you use those resources in a creative way comes up every day. And I think that there are kind of three ways we approach it. One is we have to look at what we do in the short term. So where are you going, right? Are you looking under your spotlight only and expecting to see all of that different talent right there, as opposed to going to where they are? So we've just completed something called the Be Bold Tour. We talk all the time at Facebook about being bold in our products, taking risks, right? We move fast and we break things and we fail harder. But are we being bold enough in terms of where we look and who we look for? So we've just come back from visiting. We looked at colleges that had high percentages of women, blacks, and Hispanics. And based on that, went to places like Spelman and Morehouse and Howard and Riverside and Irvine, and met with the students, the provost, the college heads, sororities, I mean, you name it. Because part of it was trying to get a sense of what are we not doing right, learning from them. And one of the things is this issue of exposure comes up, right? When you are not from that privileged background, half the time you don't even know that this thing exists. People said to me in this day and age, not 10 years ago when Facebook was founded, they said to me last month, we didn't know there were people working at Facebook. What do they do, right? There's an East Coast, West Coast thing. I mean, there's so many, this is why I started with intersectionality. There's so many reasons why one set of people have a view to opportunities and others don't. So part of what we have to do is to invest in that long term to make sure that we are finding people where they are and giving the level of exposure that causes them to also choose us, because that kind of talent could choose to go anywhere. There is a real competition for talent in this valley.
Maxine, you raise a very good point in that whether folks even know what they're doing. And I want to throw to Richard here for a moment. One of the interesting things is that, you know, we have this industry where a lot of folks talk about there's not enough talent out there, right? There's not enough people coming up through the universities, whether they be the elites or the broader ones. But a study was done recently on folks, minorities graduating with computer science degrees. So we're looking at 2% black representation in the tech industry here. 4.5% of the folks who graduated with computer science degrees, black. 6.5% Hispanic versus only 3% working. So there clearly is enough talent out there. To what degree do you think that Maxine has a point that, you know, a lot of these folks just don't know that they're doing anything wrong? I mean, is it racism, or is it just pure ignorance? Are we going down the wrong way to frame this as a racist discussion, or is it just an ignorance discussion?
Well, I think it's some of both. I mean, I have no doubt that there is bias in some of these Silicon Valley companies, and in fact, there's evidence of it. You occasionally find the smoking guns with racist tweets or sexist tweets and the like. I don't actually think that overt bias or even conscious bias accounts for most of this disparity. My suspicion is that much of it comes from two things. Some of it does come from the pipeline. 4% is still not great, but 6% is still not great. So that if we saw those numbers, I don't know that anyone here would be happy with those numbers either. But I think some of it also comes from a series of institutionalized practices that do disadvantage people of color and minorities, but they don't rise to the level of a civil rights violation. So in a sense, we're confronting problems of 2014 with tools that were developed 50 years ago in 1964. We just celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. One of the most important pieces of legislation ever passed in this country, in my opinion, and did enormous amounts of good in enormous swatches of American life. However, in 2014, many of the problems that we're confronting don't fit well with that conventional model. One, because in fact, there's less bias than there was in 1964. I think we could agree about that. And because the bias that there is more readily concealed. Most companies have fairly large human resources departments that are dedicated to litigation avoidance. And so finding the bias when it's there is harder to do. The standard of proof is difficult for plaintiffs. It turns out plaintiffs in civil rights cases lose at every stage of trial more than any other category of plaintiffs in the federal courts. So we've got, now part of this is due to the way the law was written initially. Part of it's due to decisions of the federal courts to make things harder for plaintiffs in some way. But a lot of it's due to the fact that the kind of bias that we're confronting is different than the type of bias that was most prevalent in the 1960s and 70s. Now, how can we confront this new bias, what we could call second or third generation bias, high-tech bias, if you like, that involve things like the institutional culture through which evaluation is done, evaluation that will seem to many people to be race neutral, that will seem to represent a meritocracy, but in fact winds up disadvantaging and unjustifiably disadvantaging minorities. That's a tougher question. A few things that empirical research has demonstrated, or at least suggests at this point, and this research is relatively novel, but one is specific goals and specific firm-specific ideas about increasing diversity work well. General statements about the value of diversity don't work very well. So data is extremely important. I think the revelation of this data is great because it gives some specific concrete content to the problem rather than a general kind of sense that maybe we could do better. Another important factor is that when people feel accused, when managers who are actually going to make these decisions feel like they're being accused of racism, you tend to get a backlash. And part of what I talk about in my book, The Race Card, is this phenomenon where people will say, you're just playing the race card. Well, that's a reaction, a defensive reaction to an attempt to talk about the problem. But it's also a function of the way we've been trained to talk about the problem, in part by law and lawyers. So, people like me are to blame for this. But it turns out there may be more productive ways to talk about it.
We're in a law school.
Right. So there's certainly bigots need to be called out and held to task, but most of the problem will be resolved more likely, at least according to the best social science that we have available now, by trying to engage managers and seeing, and people responsible for hiring decisions, seeing diversity as a positive goal that they're on board with. And so that's a complexity, and I think it's in many ways a harder problem to solve than maybe even harder than the problem of dislodging, unrepentant bigots.
Reverend, you were a young man in 1964. Is this a civil rights issue?
Yes, I wish I had the capacity to complicate a simple situation. Measurement speaks volumes. We're over-indexed in Silicon Valley companies as consumers, on-indexed as business partners. We're still looking for the core of tech, and that has an important, but there's no lack of lawyers and ad agencies and marketing people that can handle these jobs. They tend to build these companies in downtown USA and our suburbs as opposed to in the city. Hard work and effort matters. Inheritance and access matters more. I said hard work and effort matters. Inheritance and access matters more. We all get along better at the superficial level of desegregation by skin color. So we now can go to any hotel, motel, park, or library. When Dr. King spoke in Washington in 1963, the day he spoke from Texas over to Florida up to Maryland, we couldn't use a single public toilet. My high school class, senior class, could not take pictures on the lawn of state capitals. We could not rent a Holiday Inn room or buy ice cream at Howard Johnson's. Black and Latino soldiers sat behind knots of POWs on American military bases. That was a kind of crude apartheid system. We basically broken that one down. Then the next layer had to do with the right to vote. And we got the right to vote in 1965. But it was different still in that blacks could not vote white women couldn't serve on juries in the South. And 18-year-olds who were serving in Vietnam could not vote. And we could not vote on college campuses. We could not vote bilingually. Nor could we get forceful representation at in the conventions. Then we got the right to vote, but then there was something called gerrymandering, annexation, and law rule purchase. In other words, racism is not skin deep, it is bone marrow deep. And there are layers to be uncovered. We've gotten past the layer of public accommodations. Right vote is now under attack again. 600,000 taken off the roads in Texas. Election determined by that in 2000. So we've got, but now when it comes to access, the capital industry technology deal flow, the deeper you get, the wider it gets, the more exclusionary it gets. So you've got 20,000 auto dealerships, 200 African American. GM has 4,000 dealerships, 36 African American. It gets deeper. The debt offerings. One company had a $60 billion debt offering, $300 million in fees. Neither black nor brown nor woman got a dime of that money. We did a study on debt offerings. And so this issue of gender inequality and racial injustice, we've hardly touched the surface on that. And I think we would do well to know that the racism, in this sense, can be measured. But we can't say racism, we have to say conservative. Yesterday's Southern segregationists in the lineage of Jefferson Davis, when we got right to vote, became Goldwater Reagan Republicans. So the segregationists became conservatives. And so there are no more racists. You cannot call anybody a racist unless they do something extremely crude. The bar for racism is just it's too high to touch anymore. But these same forces now have brought in a Confederate ideology that's driving every dimension of our culture. And while Silicon Valley is in focus right now, look at our law schools and our med schools.
There's clearly a lot to be done.
Yeah.
Laura.
And my point is that while this is a low-hanging grape because it's so visible and such a growth factor, it's not just this industry we're dealing with, really, as we open up this session, this phase of our struggle.
Laura, you bring a unique perspective to the panel because you've worked in some of these companies, you've worked with some of these companies, you've seen it from both sides. Tell us what you're thinking. Is enough being done?
No, and I actually, to the respect of all my panelists, I have a contrarian view that I don't think that Facebook, Google, that putting this into the box of a race matter would actually bring forth diversity in tech. So that being said, I've been to a lot of events at Google, more than I can count in the past year, geared towards Latinos. I have not seen one single recruiter come to these events. Facebook is next 4 miles away from Eastside Prep, which has predominantly Latino and Black. High school graduates that go on to college degree 94% go on to get a 4-year university degree, and they're having a hard time getting internships. Then we also talk about race, and I think it's about structural change. This is not a meritocracy, and we all know it. This is a cryonism, right? Like everyone is pretty much hiring, like appointing your friends to position of authority, and this is what happens in Silicon Valley. When you have a cryonism, it's not a meritocracy that actually allows that to happen. So I think like when you hire by association, when you have 3% or 2% African Americans, and then a Googler gets hired by a Twitter and then it gets hired by Facebook, you're perpetuating the same percentages of diversity that happen. And so then you become a plutocracy, right? Where like you're hired by wealth. Like you actually became wealthy because you were pre-IPO or now you're post-IPO. So I do think that when Peter Thiel, who is very well respected in Silicon Valley, said meritocracy works if you know the right person, a lot of us don't know the right person. My mother is in the audience. My sister is too. My 5th grade teacher that taught me English. I grew up in Redwood City that catered to a lot of sort of service organizations to Palo Alto and Woodside. And so when you when you actually say we're working on it, I think like I've experienced not explicit racism actually has been, a lot of it has been implicit and then are structurally. I think my friend Erica Joy wrote a beautiful piece on Medium, and you talk about the psychological effects of being different in technology and how that affects your own psychology. And I can quote, Ben Horowitz talks about being an entrepreneur, and I am too, and how your psychology has been. I do think that when I was the only one speaking Spanish to the service staff, when there's this whole banalization of service workers in the industry where they're getting $16 an hour, where the median income in Silicon Valley is $94,000 a home is $4.5 million, and you have the server workers, the security guards, the ones that are actually serving you food, getting $16 an hour. And there's I study sociology, and so there, like as a graduate student, there is a famous saying, I see that you're not there. And a lot of people are ignoring like where we can find diversity. Then we become part of these perks, like the free food, the great health care. And so we don't see the service workers. We don't see that the exploitation is happening right before our eyes, that we're in modern day Egypt when we go and say, the Egyptians built this great monument things. And that's what we're doing in technology. We're building these things that society is going to think about later on, but at the expense of whom and expense of the labor of what people.
One company you didn't mention was Twitter, where you spent a lot of time. I think you were in charge of their Spanish.
I was in charge of localization.
Localization, okay. Tell us a couple of anecdotes you've noticed in Twitter, that kind of underscore what you're arguing.
I don't point to Twitter or YouTube or Jawbone or anything. I think at Twitter, it was a great, I cannot give enough to Ev and Biz as co-founders. At Twitter, it was actually one of the best experiences I've had in my life as a professional, because they actually didn't understand what we were trying to build, and they just saw the potential that I brought, and so did everyone in the team did. Being at Twitter and being the first Latina, and then being the first Latina for a long time was a little bit disheartening, but I don't think that it was a purpose. I think when I talk about the structural changes, what are the structural changes that we actually want to recognize? Are there hidden bias, or are they actually unconscious? There's two different terms. If you have unconscious bias, it's things that you don't think about when you're hiring someone. If they're hidden, it's like you actually know I'm making this decision based on the fact that this is a woman or a Muslim or whatever it is. So I think at Twitter, one of the anecdotes was when the Mexican ambassador, Arturo Sarucan, was the first one to tweet in an official capacity in Washington, D.C., his people sent someone to talk to me, and then we gathered everyone. We're like, diplomats are tweeting in D.C., let's make a big deal. And so Arturo Sarucan came, and Biz, I don't think it was not wanting to deal with it. When you're a growing company, you want to deal with your business. And one of the co-founders went and was like, find the other Mexicans in the company. And I'm like, just me. They were like, yeah. And so anyway, at the end of the day, I went and grabbed my friends who worked at more traditional tech companies, not the Googles, not the Twitters, not the Facebooks, not anything. They actually worked in Cisco or worked at Adobe or Oracle, who have better hiring practices about diversity sometimes the newer tech companies than the new generation does.
Nancy,
Let me ask you a question, please.
Yeah.
These companies cannot be the smartest and the dumbest at the same time.
Mine or yours?
The companies. They cannot have the most vision and be the most blind at the same time. We must make some choices here. These companies target women and people of color for business and profits. They know we exist. When they say we don't exist, it's not true. But where they're the same place where there's market, money, talent, location, there's also capacity. It represents growth. So they're missing market, money, talent, location. These same companies that we say are just kind of cool guys, don't wear shirts and ties, and wear shoes and no socks, kind of cool kind of guys. At the same time, these cool guys are very astute business people. They take offshore tax money. They're smart. They get tax cuts. That's smart. They maximize profits. That's smart. But they're judged by profits and product, not by social justice. And it becomes the civil rights movement's duty to expose these inconsistencies and demand that they have plans. The inclusion is they have plans for profit. These companies have the capacity, plan to make them look like America and not exploit us by denying us opportunity. That's my appeal.
Well, Nancy, Laura mentioned something about Cisco. Is this something that really is a issue with the newer tech companies rather than the older ones that have had time to mature and focus on these issues more, or is it just separate, different companies across the board?
I mean, I think if you look at the disclosure of data that all of these companies produced, I think Cisco actually has shared its data for quite a while through through sharing its EEO1. I think we all suffer from the same plight, that we're all doing poorly. I think there is a difference in that some of the companies that are more mature have been at it longer, trying to put together programs and plans to try and tackle this absence of diversity in the tech industry. I think with some of the newer breed, if you will, and I'll say this for Google, which is kind of a teenager, so we're not kind of the new kid on the block, and we're obviously much larger, so we're not an agile Twitter. But I mean, I don't think there's any question that there was a basic lack of awareness. There continues to be a lack of awareness. That's why we wanted to disclose the numbers, so that we raise awareness that these are unacceptable numbers. And I think also that there is this unconscious bias, and so it's incumbent upon us to educate people, make them aware of these types of things that are not, they're not intentional, but they're pernicious. So I think that we were growing so quickly, for example, at Google. I'm sure Facebook has the same set of circumstances, that you're just laser focused on getting the talent in, moving very quickly, et cetera. And when you step back to look at what the actual composition of your workforce looks like, we obviously were incredibly dissatisfied, and that's led us on this journey. So I do think other companies have been at it longer.
Can I say something? I think I commend Google for saying unconscious bias, but they're not all unconscious. I think that there is hidden bias that we don't want to talk about, because putting them together in the unconscious bias makes us not responsible. And we have to be responsible at any given point on what the decisions that we're making. If we are not hiring the right people, we're not making the right initiatives. Like, unconscious means that we're not actually acknowledging
unconscious,
it.
Absolutely. I think unconscious means that it's maybe not intentional, or that one's not even aware of the effect that that cognitive shortcut that one is taking in sizing up the qualifications of an individual actually does account for those prejudices or stereotypes that we've learned or acquired. I think calling it out and priming people to be aware of it is necessary, because then they can make it conscious, make the unconscious conscious, and mitigate the effects of it.
Maxine, what are the next steps for the industry? We've seen the disclosure of the numbers. We know there's an issue. We're having public discussions about it. What are the next concrete steps we should all be taking?
I think it's good that we've been talking about the older generation and the new generation, because, I mean, in addition to Cisco, companies like Intel have been releasing their numbers for a decade, right? And so we have things to learn from those who have been at it for longer. Right? Microsoft is another company. I'm not talking about disclosure, but being at it for a long time, right? Yeah. Where you hear people talking about
older.
them. They're older. They've invested longer. There are things that we've learned. We have to use this creativity. We have to use the interest. When I talk about this competition for talent, it is so intense, right? I would say here, there is no tech company here that does not want this talent, right? Mm-hmm. So I see your eyes opening, Reverend Jackson. We want the talent. How we go about getting this talent, right? Both on the business side and on the tech side. The reason we spend a lot of time talking about tech is because in some of our companies, tech is where the bulk of the hiring is, and we already see more diversity on the business side. If we look at gender, we will see that on the tech side, there will be 16% of the people who are software engineers who are women. On the business side, 50%, because the pipeline can give us that organically. So when you are young and struggling, Facebook, 10 years ago, Mark was a 20-year-old in a dorm room, dropping out of college, doing code, right? It's that young a company. When you begin, you're struggling. He has an idea and he's trying to find friends around him who will help him and who believe in this thing and work with him. And as everybody has said here, Laura said it about Twitter, right? The younger your company is, the more you're just invested in trying to stay alive. And then you step back one day and you say, okay, where are we now? And we are at that point where we have to do...
A black or brown youth coming out of Stanford has less options to come to Silicon Valley than their white counterparts, starting right here. We've discussed this at length. This is cold and calculated, and it's not good for business. It does not meet the American standard of opportunity. And why? When you look at the football game when Stanford plays Berkeley Saturday afternoon and everybody's excited, why you can accept the outcome, lose or win? Because the playing field is even, and the rules are public, and the goals are clear, the referees are fair, and the scores are transparent. When it comes to access to the valley and its extensions across America, it's not fair. And there must be some commitment to study the DNA of the unfriends and figure out how do you profit from inclusion as opposed to the price of doing business. What are the advantages in inclusion? Is there a plan to expand the marketplace? Now, if there's a plan to expand the marketplace, then you'll find where that market, money, talent, location is. And most companies with whom we've met are just getting around to even talking about an HR department. But one must be as vigorous in pursuing the market as one is in pursuing profits, if it's to happen.
Richard, I want to throw this open to questions like I promised in just a minute. But before we do, I want to talk about each of the last few panelists mentioned universities. And what role can universities have in this thing? Spitting out well-qualified students, in some case before they graduate. But what role should the universities have in framing the debate and getting to the point where all of the panelists want to get to?
Well, other than hosting panels like this one, I would say universities can do, I mean, there's several things. To the extent that people are talking about the pipeline comes through the university. And the truth is that in the STEM majors that feed into the tech side, university, the population of the students that graduate from those majors is overwhelmingly white and male, and Asian. And that is a failure of the university. That's a failure of the university to appropriately recruit and nurture women and minority students in these majors. We could do better about that. The fact of the matter is, now, once again, if you go to the computer science department, am I saying that you're going to find racists who are trying to keep out the black and Latino students? No, that's not my claim. However, I do think that you'll find some people with biases, to be sure, with preconceived ideas about the kind of person who's going to be good and the kind of person that's not. And some of the evaluations are subjective. Many are objective, but some are subjective. And in addition, and maybe more importantly, there's a culture. There's a culture that exists in those departments and among the student body who helps who's comfortable in those environments. Now, you take a kid who's coming from Stanford. That kid has options. And they go into the tech field, and they don't feel especially comfortable. And they don't feel especially welcome. And maybe they see sexist graffiti on some of the cubicles, or maybe they overhear bigoted remarks from some of the people who they'll be working with. And at some point, I could tell you I was that kid in the 1980s. They said, I could do something else. I've got options. And why would I go into an industry where I can expect to encounter the same type of thing for the rest of my career when I could shift gears and do something that would be more hospitable? Now, it's not to say that the law is any kind of, Shangri-La racial harmony. It's not. But you do see, more growth and better representation in some fields than others, and tech is kind of, is really lagging behind. So I think universities could do work in making those departments better for women and minority students, so that we could expand that pipeline a little bit. Now, that's not that's a longer term solution. You're going to have to wait, at least 4 years for those people to graduate and fill the jobs. But I think we can do that, and I also think that we can do a lot in terms of education about the problems of bias, where structural and institutionalized bias exist in decision making, so that people who are of goodwill can work on rooting it out. You can't do much about the unrepentant bigot unless he or she reveals themselves so that you can slap them with the lawsuit. You can't do anything about those people, and they're smart enough to hide their biases. But you can do something about the person who, they kind of care, but actually they've got a lot of other things on their mind, like they want the company to succeed, and they're not really thinking about it. And maybe we'll just hire somebody that I know from my frat. That's the kind of thing that you could begin to educate people against. Instead, your company 10 years from now is not going to be where you want it to be if that's the way you go about doing your initial hiring. You're going to wind up, with a serious problem that then you have to work hard to unravel, to figure out how to change the institutional culture, to figure out how to change the practices and the patterns of hiring that are going to continue to give you this bias. And we could talk about other things. I mean, we could talk about the pattern of race and gender in venture capital, which which is overwhelmingly white male, and which overwhelmingly funds white and male companies. Lots of data about this, and lots of data about how that's not a rational decision, about how companies headed by women, in particular, I'm aware of this data, do better or more profitable, have fewer problems, or that have women included, that is, than companies that are all male, but the money's all going to the all male companies. Why? Well, a lot of this is because you're making, kind of a judgment based on subjective factors, and the people who remind you of yourself maybe look a little more like a good bet. And that's the kind of thing that we can fix anywhere we can educate people about. Sorry, dude.
No problem. As much as I love them, I think the last people I would want to hire would be my frat brothers. This is off the record, right? All right, let's open it up to questions. Who's got the first one? Right over here.
I'm a little older than most of the people here, and I've experienced a little more of this than most of you. But one of the first things I see is just a repetition of issues and problems that we've been facing for many years. And one of the prime things that I found in my earlier years was one way, the surest way to change behavior inside any company is to pay for performance. And to the extent that diversity is not a factor in determining a manager's salary, it's not important. And in entrepreneurial organizations where you're trying to build something as rapidly as possible and as profitably as possible, there's no motivation to be involved with anything involving diversity. And so I think you have to start with pay for performance. I don't believe that the Silicon Valley companies are deliberately being discriminatory. They're not. It's benign neglect, though. And to the extent that if we start with determining, you get paid for what you measure. And every manager in the company, once you begin to mature in the company, you begin to measure the performance. And to the extent that you make diversity an important measure of performance, you can develop change in the organization. Until you do that, it's just lip service.
Interesting. We have at Gannett specific performance measures tied to diversity. Do you guys have them at Google and Facebook?
Can I just answer really quick? I think putting a quota or a number towards diversity would actually be a roadblock to any progress, because I feel like when you put numbers, you're not really understanding what are once again the structural change that you should be making earlier on. So if you put a manager in charge, and I've managed people in saying, now hire this many women, now hire this many African Americans, now hire this many Muslims, now hire this many Latinos, it's going to put a restraint on me on how to actually perform together as the growth of the company. So I don't believe in quotas, I don't believe in numbers, but I think that's the right question that you should be asking the bigger guys.
If you penalize people for the failures, then you avoid the risk. And if you don't take the risk, you can't make the progress.
Maxine?
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to distinguish between rewarding for hiring, which is illegal, and rewarding for effort at the sourcing stage, and that is something that we do. So we are trying to learn from people who have been successful at this before. We think about the NFL, that for the first 80 years of the league's existence did not have a minority coach. And when Rooney came along and said, I'm going to put in this rule that whenever there is an open position for a head coach, you have to consider a minority. In the first 3 years, the percentage went to 22%. So we know that at the sourcing stage, there's where you can put some targets in place without going afoul of the law, without raising the issue that Lara creates about what happens in your culture if you've designated quotas, besides the question of whether it's legal or not. And we do, in fact, put things in place to make sure that at the sourcing stage that we are putting the effort in to finding the options at the top of the funnel so that we can keep the bar as high as we need it to be and still get more diversity at the end of the process.
Actually, when our civil rights movement began to picket football games for not hiring a black, Rooney's response to it was, here's how to handle that. As opposed to just hiring a white coach and hiring black and firing whites. In the future, a good but conservative remedy was at least consider a black. But it came as a response to our demand. We have found that demands have more impact ultimate than just moral appeals.
But the question was, what are the actual things we can put in place? And I think sourcing goals are actual things we can put in place. So whether Rooney was responding to demand or to his own sense of some sort of moral integrity, something was put in place that made a difference. And I think that's where we need to focus.
If you are still fishing for fish in a small pool, you'll get predictable fish because they were kind of artificially put there. You know, it's like we could play baseball before 1947, but the rules changed. Slave masters didn't retire. We required the 13th Amendment. Segregators didn't retire. They required the Civil Rights Act of '64. Locking out women did not end until it got Title IX. It's something we need to be protected by law. Voluntary measures without equal protection under the law has not worked for us.
We got a question in the back there. Folks, I want to, our folks who are streaming this for video, respectfully ask that you come down to the microphone so they can get your questions on the tape or whatever they're using these days.
Hi, I'm Wayne Sutton from Build Up in San Francisco. We know the data from all the tech companies and challenges, and I think we need to keep in mind that entrepreneurship is a choice. If we're honest, part of the reason why we've been having this conversation is about the billions of dollars that's being generated in wealth. With that being said, what solutions does the panel suggest on how to create change in culture in diverse communities that we're actually talking about having the biggest impact in? Changing the culture to teach and educate how to create wealth using technology outside of Silicon Valley. And do you think that is important? Because everyone can't come here, and this is, not necessarily the promised land as it so has been said sometimes.
Who wants to take that?
Outside my expertise.
Again, I was trying to process that.
Yeah. So the question is, what solutions does the panel suggest to how to change culture in diverse communities, or how to create wealth using technology? Because we talk about pipelines and opportunities and jobs and coming here, and then because we know the data, but there's so many communities outside of the Bay Area that still could launch a successful company, technology product. But how do they generate wealth, and how do you impact those cultures to do that in a positive way?
Apart from the companies dismissing people out of hand, we must show the profitability and growth. And growth comes out of inclusion. And it's like, I keep using baseball. Before 1947, they chose only from a pool of white players. And they called that the World Series. There were no Latin American players, no African American players, and no Japanese players. It was a white series called World. And they thought it was a big social challenge to really find a black. And finally find Minaminoso. They had to break the culture to expand the playing field. And we're saying that over here in this ghetto, in this barrio, that may be more talent over there than here. We may not have seen Tech's best days because we've not seen potentially its best players, its most creative. And that's the point. The notion that you're doing those who are locked out of favor, those who are locked in may be doing themselves a disfavor by not expanding the pool. And we said, if you say we want to have 5 or 10% in 10 years, then let's plant them. That means taking kids in the second grade and teach them apps and codes. That means invest in that. It means those schools that are training engineers, invest in them, up their grade, and invest in them. We kind of get what we can measure and what we invest in. There is no shortage of capacity to be engineers, to tech engineers, and in other phase of this business. There's nothing magical and mystical about the valley. There's something historically exclusionary about it, but nothing magical or mystical about it.
Question over here.
Thank you. Ruby Zeppo from Intel Corporation. I have a couple of questions for Richard. So we have a lot of programs for women and girls because we find that they drop out much earlier than college and STEM education. So my first question is, what are universities doing to seed your own pools further down the chain? And the second question is, you said there were valuation systems that seemed race neutral but weren't. I was wondering if you could give us a couple examples.
Sure. Well, I mean, in terms of what universities are doing to feed the pipeline further down, there are some initiatives. I can't say that I know the specifics, but I know that a lot of universities are concerned about this and are engaging in initiatives to find underrepresented populations. It's a broader push than just gender. There's race, there's class, economic status as well, where people are looking to find an untapped pool of qualified students, and there's good research to suggest that there really is a significant untapped pool of kids that don't even know to apply to a school like Stanford, that wouldn't think of applying to a school like Stanford, but would be qualified and do great if they got here. So I know the university's looking toward more outreach in that respect. Whether it's enough, that I can't speak to. As far as bias processes, I mean, here are several examples. Word of mouth hiring. We've talked about startups that are, they're started in somebody's garage. There are only a few people, and how do they hire? Well, they hire through word of mouth. I know people that work in the tech industry, and very often, there were a bunch of guys that were sitting around, and we came up with an idea, and we started, and then, we ask, who do you know that might be interested or that could join? And so word of mouth hiring is, notorious for producing homogenous pools of labor. But that's how a lot of these companies got started. Now, you can't blame them. It's not as if they said, hey, let's have word of mouth hiring so that we can keep out the minorities and the women. It's just the way the company got started. But that pattern gets established, and then the criterion that are applied, even when they're not doing word of mouth hiring, when they're big, like Google and Facebook and Twitter, are the same criterion that they used when they were doing word of mouth hiring, a lot of which might involve things like questions that look neutral but really aren't. What are you geeky about? Questions that or criterion of evaluation that aren't as job related as people think, and that could be reevaluated if people dug in and tried to figure out what do we really need and what is it that we just think we need but actually isn't central to the job.
It's interesting in a world where we've seen such dramatic advances through tech in helping communicate with each other as a species, that word of mouth is still the issue.
But the word of mouth comes into, it's the same communism that I talk about. You just hire friends into places of authority, and then it becomes perpetuated by saying that Silicon Valley is meritocracy. Laura, you got where you are because you worked hard. No, it was that, in spite of the fact that I kept going and I didn't know people. And there are hundreds and thousands of other people that want to get and break in that don't know and are not word of mouth, that don't know people, or even when they are inside the companies, what happens is that, as I said before, people promote you get in, there's a diverse number. Yes, we have a diverse company. 40% at Facebook are Asian. And the executive level, how many are there? right? And so then, or even at Twitter or the Facebook, like you get hired and then after you get hired, so it's the pipeline, it's actually the unconscious or hidden bias, and then it becomes in the growth opportunity. And growth and venture capital as an entrepreneur is the same. So I do think that Silicon Valley, as long as it says meritocracy works if you know somebody, it's not really a meritocracy, right?
Question over here.
Yeah, so my name's Laura Mather, and this gets to a lot of what people are saying, a question about what can we actually do. There's a lot of research out there on how to actually address unconscious bias. And right now, a lot of that's being done through training, unconscious bias training. But unfortunately, the research shows that the training doesn't actually work. But I think that there are ways, because the research shows things we can do, we can actually put them into the processes we're using for hiring and recruiting and such. And this is a little self-serving because I'm building the software to do that. But I think that we can move into technology the things that are well understood on how to address these unconscious biases. So it's more a point of, I think we should look at technology to actually move this issue forward, and I think we can.
Question over here.
Yeah, hi. My name is Alex Ontiveros, and I'm the publisher for Silicon Valley Latino Media. My question is related to, we have programs about STEM, and I'm a big fan of STEM education, STEM promotion, and we do what we can with that. What I'd like to have both Nancy and Maxine share with us in terms of what is Facebook and what is Google doing around, and I'm going to back into this a bit. I think it's very important for our youth to see Latinas, Latinos, African Americans that are in those roles. And I think it's very important to see them at the earliest age possible, because even though there's these great STEM programs that people like my friend Deanna are running and others, if these kids don't see themselves being that, because the media that they see in television that, we're criminals or we're dropouts or whatever the issues are, if they don't see themselves as being a scientist or whatever it is, then they're not going to be encouraged or engaged to go into a STEM program. So can you share with us what it is that you guys do?
I'd love to share, and I wish I had one of my colleagues from work who works very actively on a campaign that it's really a movement where what we're trying to do is influence a lot of media outlets, because I think, to your point, if you don't see it, you don't realize you can be it. And we wholeheartedly recognize, we work very, very closely with the Gina Davis Foundation, which is more focused on the absence of women as positive role models in STEM education and just generally in media. A lot of really great data-based, metric-based measurement to demonstrate the absence of those role models. Some of this work is falling over with people of color as well. So because we have a pretty, we have a big bullhorn and we have a lot of relationships, we have a content creating machine in YouTube, we have lots of ways that we can leverage relationships we have to try and influence media. The model that we are sort of tracking a little bit, except it's somewhat dated, is something that an individual who from Harvard's School of Public Policy, Jay Winstein, did, where he worked to really elevate this concept of designated driver by going straight to media and asking them to portray this responsible drinking and designated driving. He did that by knocking on doors at NBC, ABC, et cetera, and getting storylines built around that concept. So that is a really powerful way, I think, for us to use our leverage with these kinds of media channels to do exactly the same thing. The challenge is that media is consumed very differently than it was back in the days of Cheers, right? And so we've got to have a really a multifaceted media approach. We are absolutely working with very early stage Disney, ABC, Disney thing, lots of those kinds of companies. YouTube, again, it's our platform, so we can focus on content. Lots of young kids consuming it there. So I'm with you 100%. I think you'll see us doing more. We are focused on that.
Reverend Jackson. Oh, go ahead, Maxine.
Yeah, one of the things that we are trying to do more of is to use technology to level the playing field by getting information to the people who have previously not had access. So when we talk about the privileged people, those who have the access to certain universities and certain networks and can be in word-of-mouth circles, they know, for instance, what our companies are looking for. When we say it's not every computer science course that would produce the type of computer scientists that we need. We need people who, for instance, at Facebook, who know a lot about algorithms and data structures. So if you went to Stanford, that's what they teach there, right? So in addition to the fact that you're right in Silicon Valley, you're also learning just the type of thing we need, right? So what happens to the person who's in a non-core school, who is in a heavily Latino school, a heavily black school, where they're not teaching exactly that? One of the ways we're trying to do it to expose them to the same level of opportunity is, for instance, we teach a course called Crush the Coding Interview, where we have some of our minority engineers get on screen and show exactly what we're looking for, do the whiteboarding process that many minorities have never even heard of, right? So they walk into a room, and even if they are bright, and even if they do know about algorithms, they don't know that they're supposed to stand up there and actually talk about what they're thinking as they're working through the problem so that we see that they understand the process of solving it, right? There are all these little ways in which inequities pop up. And those little things add up to some having less opportunity and others having more. So by scaling the efforts, we are not as big as Google. They're like 10 times our size, right? Yet. We can't send people. We literally don't have that population that could be physically everywhere, but we understand technology. So we are thinking about how can we use technology to spread the information so that everyone has access to the information so that the playing field, little by little, can get more level.
Reverend, a quick question about, we've talked a lot about bottom-up solutions here for using technology, universities, intercompany. What about top-down? You've had some experience in national politics. Is the president doing enough to highlight this issue?
That leadership, I'm convinced, must come bottom-up. I think at the top, those companies that get government contracts have a legal duty honor the law. And many of those who are getting government contracts are not honoring the legal standard for inclusion. Today I see in California they want to raise tuition 5% the next 4 years and raise standards without raising wages. I mean, you're going to have fewer and fewer with more and more access based on money, not necessarily based. You may be leaving talent at the bottom because talent can't afford to rise to the top. We're driving inequality with that data that's coming out just today. So I am very concerned that the government must begin to even hold hearings. If a corporation can get tax cuts at home, offshore tax havens abroad, and bring in visa workers and not hire Americans and make profits, it will do that for that to stop. Right now, there's very conscious schemes of profit over people. That's not unconscious.
Are you calling for hearings on Capitol Hill?
Absolutely.
Any response yet?
Well, not yet. And I think that the point here is that why do we have so many women in the room tonight? Is it just talent? Something called Title IX. It's illegal to lock women out. We deserve to be civil rights to be protected by law. And once a standard is set by law, people adjust the law as if it's natural. But Title VII is not natural, it's law. We've adjusted it, we feel it's natural, but it wasn't natural in 1964. Title IX, the reason why you have women basketball teams, it's illegal to have a male team not having a female team. It's law, so it just feels natural, but it wasn't natural when Title IX was passed. We need equal protection under the law. And unless these companies feel the pressure of national government standards, they will not do it voluntarily, in my experience.
Next question.
Hi. I am one of the 1%. I am a Latina engineer in Silicon Valley. Turns out 1% of us are Latinas. So it's a little joke. Haha. So anyway, we've talked a lot about the pipeline. Let's forget about the pipeline for a second. What should companies do? What are companies doing to keep women and minorities in those roles in industry? I mean, there's a startling statistic: 50% of women leave mid-career as software engineers. I'm extremely fortunate to be working with one other woman in my company right now, and she's about to hit 50. She's like a goddess. But there aren't very many people like her. And if we're talking about showing kids what they can be when they grow up, if we're all leaving because the environment is awful, because it's all about beer culture and bro culture and et cetera, what do we do to keep people in and not let them leave when we work so hard to get them in there in the first place?
I can respond. I think we have to all be conscious of what our culture is. So I came from the law firm world before I went here, and women were leaving just as much, right? It's not a Silicon Valley problem. It's a problem of what is your culture, what are your expectations, what do you put in place for professional support. So, for instance, at Facebook, we strongly believe in peer support and in the company supporting that through lean-in circles, because we see women saying, and not just at Facebook, there are 20,000 circles all over the world, that when I have a community of support, that helps me to scale my skills, my confidence, etc. We try to have a situation where if there is bear culture, bro culture, that our manager, this is where we go top down, that is not tolerated if it is creating an atmosphere of exclusion. We created our own unconscious bias training where, we literally go through scenarios. If this happens, what is the response to that, right? And then what is the consequence of being either a manager who tolerates that or the actor who does that? But as we've been saying here, some of it is conscious and unknowing, perhaps. That's how you define your hidden bias. And then some of it is unconscious. Very little of it these days is completely, I wish you would leave, you Latina. You've been here long enough. People don't do that, right? It's all these micro inequities that add up. So we just have to be really vigilant to try to trap them, to catch them when they come up and then create a type of culture that doesn't support that. So one of the things people talked before about, people being sensitive, about being too open about some things because you're afraid, like, now you're going to get in trouble with the law, right, for admitting that you have some issues. Well, we certainly at Facebook err on the side of being more open because we feel like unless people can admit what's happening, we can't start to address it. So we try to get as many avenues as possible for these things to come out so that we can find the ways to deal with them, to create an environment. We don't have a choice at Facebook, right? It's not like we're creating something for use in a local market. More than 80% of the people who use Facebook do not live in North America. It is a truly global product. We cannot afford to exclude anyone because it's not like 80% of them are men, right? We need to have as many diverse perspectives as possible, building these products and supporting them if we're going to survive. Like, it is a question of survival. So we don't have a choice but to be as vigilant as we can to make sure that culture is one that can support all of that diversity so we can get those perspectives to build the products. And we see that with vigilance, there is a drop in attrition. So I know that it works.
So really quick, I know other Latina engineers here, so please, they can be part of your 1%. Diana and Veronica over there. That being said as well, it's not necessarily about the explicit quote-unquote oppression that you might face in the workforce, as you, myself. It's the growth opportunities, right? Like, where do we see that we can actually grow here? And I think it's not necessarily like, is someone being overly attacking me in this meeting? It's about, am I going to grow in these companies, in a bigger company? I decided I wasn't. I actually hit glass doors, glass ceilings, glass windows, whatever you want to say. And I started my own company. So I do think that is where can you see growth opportunity? And I talk about the growth opportunity that you retain people by wanting to grow. You eliminate those barriers where they actually want to be a C-level or executive at one point. Maybe people do. I never wanted. I just wanted to grow, and it wasn't in the cards for the last two companies I worked for.
John, Google and Amazon are coming to Chicago with a lot of job opportunities. If they locate downtown as they are and stores in the suburbs, recruited Northwestern and DePaul predicted that they're going to get a reinforcement. Chicago is about 65% black and brown. Why can't the stores be located there and the incubators there and begin to consciously expand the process? Not for an inferior product, but for another product, broaden the base. We're not making the case of hiring unqualified people. Making the case of stop ignoring qualified people and qualifiable people. Stop ignoring qualified and qualifiable people. And even as we keep focusing on tech, construction, lawyers, ad agencies, marketing, Amazon handling warehouse. It's a whole range of stuff in this industry. It's not in the mix. Not to mention those who make product and can't get capitalized. It seems that a black or brown cannot get with collateral what a white can get with an idea. At the end of the day, it's can we get access to capital? Are we investment worthy? And that's what comes down to a real tough situation.
Gentleman up here.
I'm Ron Peterson. I'm a graduate of the Stanford Law School some 49 years ago. Still practicing law, and I live locally, but I have no connection with Silicon Valley industry. Is it conceivable in some sense, I don't know whether this would really be functional or not, but where I'm sure there are industry groups or organizations that would allow particular companies to commit to certain, I know this is goals, this is quotas, whatever, where they would commit to certain goals in terms of resolving or solving this issue over a period of time. That's been done by bar associations. It becomes a sort of maybe a peer pressure, a branding issue, whatever you want to call it. Just an idea whether that's ever been considered.
I think actually there are several organizations that are looking at becoming the kind of quasi-bar association to do just that for the tech industry. The bar is a unique entity in that it's a pool of professionals, all of whom have to touch that. The tech industry obviously has a lot of different roles, so it's just a different creature. I certainly can speak for Google. Maxine, I'm sure, can speak for Facebook that we're open to that dialogue.
Question over here.
Yeah, I really liked the point a few minutes ago about how we have a lot of social science, we have a lot of research and data around sort of how to fix some of these cultural problems. And I know that Facebook and Google are doing really exciting stuff, testing really exciting stuff to try and see what works. I'm working on a startup to try and bring that model to smaller tech companies that are 500 people, 1,000 people, but that haven't started working on this yet. And I just wonder, you made the point that you scaled really quickly and then you looked at your workforce and were like, wow, we didn't probably do that the right way if diversity is important to us. So I just wonder if you were talking to a tech company that was 500 people or 1,000 people, what would be the point that you would make to get them to invest in this right now and not be solving a way bigger problem down the road?
I would say don't get where we are, because then you're just climbing to get out. So be proactive, be deliberate, be intentional, be consistent. Know that you are, if you want your user base to look like the world, then you need your workforce to try and aspire to do that as well. So have that in mind as you build your company. Absolutely.
And my other thing would be, think of intersectionality, right? There is no one characteristic which makes you more of a minority than another. And what tends to happen is, because we have companies generally being started by white men, as the Reverend says, each of them has a woman in their lives, be it a mother, a sister, an aunt, or something. And so they their first point of entry on this is often gender. And they double down on that. And then it's years later they start thinking about race and culture. All of the other things that make us different, right? Age, skill sets, disability, veteran status, all these things. That I would want to say to you from the beginning, think about it as this range of characteristics that adds value to your company, to your products, to the service you can deliver, and do as much as you can to address as many of those elements as you can from the beginning, and not get ahead on one with the others suffering.
We have time for a couple more questions. I know there's a lot of people lined up, and we will be here when we're done if you want to come down and engage with the panelists one-on-one. But time for a few more.
Good evening. My name is John Waldrop. I'm a partner at a firm here in the Bay Area. I practice patent litigation and represent a number of tech companies. And I want to preface my talk, and I'm from Alabama too, so this will frame my question. But I want to preface it by saying I'm an optimist, and I believe that we are going to make a change with people like Reverend Jackson involved. But I would like to push the panel and push the issue a little bit. And I would like to say, what if I was to say, because there's a lot of discussion about pipelines and that kind of thing and how that limits. What if I was to say, I don't believe that? I think that is a line that people say to avoid the issue. And I said, look, let's take areas where the pipeline is robust. And we'll take, since I'm a lawyer, I'll take law, and I'm a litigator, I'm a trial lawyer. And I say to you that some of the best trial lawyers in the country are women and minorities. I think everyone would agree with that. Some of the best. They win cases everywhere.
Willie Garrett.
Willie Garrett. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And if I was to say to you.
Charlotte University, not Stanford or Harvard.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Marshall, Howard.
Yes, sir.
Not Stanford or Harvard.
Yes, sir. So the pipeline is robust. But most of these high-tech companies don't have any lead trial lawyers that they use in any particular area. Just take away patent litigation, which people say, well, that's high-tech and blah, 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 whatever. But look at the areas where pipelines are robust. Many of these high-tech companies don't have any lead trial lawyers who stand up and say, I represent such and such tech company, where they don't use them. But they can't say that there's no pipeline. And that's just but one example. What about other examples where the pipeline is robust? But there's no. So my question is there a willingness to be brutally honest in the tech world? Brutally honest and not say pipeline, but say, look, we have a serious problem. And we got to be honest with each other and not hide behind, oh, well, we need to go to these schools and train these people up and, they're not getting it and we're very smart, whatever. And I ask my questions, I want to push it a little bit because I think that is, I don't necessarily believe it. And a lot of people who I talk to don't believe it.
I'll take this. I think you're citing something that we absolutely do recognize, that when it comes to tech talent, for example, where there's a very unique skill set, that pipeline is certainly part of the issue. But for a lot of different roles, the pipeline is not the issue. So if we don't look like the market and what the market can produce, then we've got to get underneath why that's happening. And I think we are all very serious about doing that. So yeah, we own that.
I feel like that admission has been made.
Yeah.
Okay, we have time.
The most right-wing people I know will get a trial in Washington, D.C. and get a black lawyer. Because the jurors like to be black. I mean, when the power shifts, the arrangement shifts. And they don't, not necessarily looking for them to come from an elite school. They can come from Howard, Shaw, wherever, because it's a power arrangement. I want to make this appeal since you're challenging us, is that suppose you are a one-eye quarterback and you're making less money because you got less talent and less market. Let's shift the paradigm. Because there's the assumption that you have less talent and some money and more risk over here. You may be choosing from a less of a pool than is available. The second, I would challenge the industry, since I'm on this gallery, to begin to imagine. Since this is, Disney World used to be the heart of imagination. But the tech community must imagine training its children rather than jailing them. And those who are in jail, as they come out now, because laws are changing, train them not to go back to use the skills they've developed. Why can't we imagine our youth from K to 12 becoming computer competent in our schools as opposed to figuring out how to raise tuition and leave wages stagnant? Can't we imagine if we don't have the available money? I repeat again, if we cut a deal to repatriate some of that $23 billion offshore money, some deal to cut it, to bring it back, to invest in those who will train them to catch up. And that's possible, but it requires, imagine, it's not going to come from Washington.
And really,
it's going to come from the people here who would benefit from such creating a new pool.
And really quick, I agree with you. I feel like the referral system within the tech companies right now perpetuates this word of mouth, like this association, this criminism that we say. Like when you refer people right now, you get money if you're in the tech companies. So how is the pipeline and admitting that, hey, we're doing something, it goes against to what already people want to do is refer their friends, and how do their friends look like? If the numbers are correctly, then most of their friends are going to look like them and they're not going to be diverse. So I do think that the referral system right now in a lot of tech companies, I know, goes against into like, let's acknowledge that the pipeline is not the issue. The issue is that there might be different ways of how to get that talent. And I go back on saying like, If you're hosting events and if you're saying you care about diversity, why aren't you doing proactive outreach within those events, right? And so I think like referral system actually is the same as alumni in prestigious universities in Ivy Leagues. It's the same pattern.
Last question.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Make it a good one.
Yeah. Okay. My name is Anthony Kenslow. I'm a PhD student in civil engineering here at Stanford. I guess I'll start with my thought process was first, everyone knows that diversity is, has been proven to create more innovative, creative, and dynamic ideas and solutions. So I was thinking that was a disconnect there when you're talking about these high-tech companies who that's what they want, right? They want creative, innovative, dynamic solutions and ideas, and yet they're so lacking in diversity. And so my question is, how often are these human resources personnel and executives actually being immersed in an environment or a culture that's not their own? How often are they the only white guy in the room? And do you feel if that was being more often, and not just going to see underprivileged kids, but more like Black professionals or Hispanic and Latino professionals, like how often do they get to do that? And do you think that would change their perspective of these biases that affect how they hire, affect who their friends are? Because I would also be willing to bet that most of them don't have a lot of Black friends in general. So when they were doing word of mouth, the word of mouth wasn't getting any Black people because they weren't having Black friends. So I guess that's my question to you.
I think, again, the research is very clear on this. All the sociologists have shown that the more proximate relationships you have to other people, the less bias you have and the more you see them in a positive light. It not only changes your unconscious biases, but it changes your behaviors. So, yes, exposure is a huge deal. And it's why I say that I think people start with gender often because they have exposure to women, right? And I would venture that most of them have not often been the only white guy in the room. And that if it happened more often, yes, that would change. But it's not just being in the room. So, yeah, we send people to Tapia conference and NSBE and SHIP, right? So to Latino and Black conferences. And when they go, they're the only white people in the room. But that's not enough. And how do you scientifically build relationships of value, right? That's something that is a whole other story about the history of this country and social networks, not just those created through technology, but real social networks, right? That most people live in homogeneous communities, and that's who their people are. So that's a whole bigger issue about how we get that immersion. I absolutely believe, and the research shows, that if there was more of it, that we would see differences happening more organically. Because there isn't more of it is why we have to put in all these programs to say, all right, we have to look in these places and we have to do these things and we have to create more internships and get technology to level playing fields, because there isn't that happening naturally. But we can't wait for that to happen.
All right, we are going to continue this conversation. One last point from one of Reverend Jackson's associates, which real quickly.
Yes, hi. I wanted to thank USA Today for initiating this forum. I'm Butch Wing. I'm with Reverend Jackson's staff, and we've been helping to lead this effort to get the data out there and to really face the change and change the face of technology. We're kind of seeing this as part one of the next phase in this fight. We're doing a forum December 10th. Intel Corporation is going to be hosting. Please take down my email address. It's B as in boy, WING @rainbowpush.org. And we'll be having Nancy and Maxine, right? And others from the corporate community and the community to further this dialogue about what we need to do really to set goals, targets, and timetables to move the needle in all phases of technology, to expand our participation, expand inclusion, and really make a difference. So December 10th, drop me an email, and we'll see you there.
All right, thank you. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Joe and Stanford for having us all here. Appreciate it.
I did not say that. We need, among other things, on December 10th, for companies to come with their plans wherever the development level is on their plan to expand the base vertically and horizontally. Each of them have unlimited capacity to think and staff to hire to come up with their plan in terms of your plans to go from K to pipeline to the interns, the whole range. We want to work with you on that process. And I also want to say we need somebody to develop a capital pool in which lending can take place. Because you can do all these things and have all this creativity, unless you, at the end of the day, have access to investors, it's kind of all for naught. And that's kind of where the stop is. And since I'm talking on Twitter, at Rev J. Jackson.
All right.
Facebook, like me, Reverend J. Jackson Sr. Good night.
Now that is the last word.